So in the previous lessons to this one, we've talked about things that should be good process, best practices, and we've been kind of assuming that everything is going to go along well and we'll get positive feedback, and any of the critical feedback will be probably pretty legitimate and easily handled, and that the executive director will, accept the feedback. Occasionally that's not the case, and I know that probably some of your heads have gone to, but Paula, what if? And the other thing is, some of you have been involved in executive director performance appraisals that haven't ended well. Very small percentage of ED performance appraisals actually end up in either disciplinary action or sometimes in the dismissal of the executive director, and it's a really unfortunate thing when it happens, but the reality is that the board's one employee must be held accountable by the board, and if it's not good, it's not good, and we have to deal with it. So I want to talk about the gnarly bits in this short lesson. So most of the time we're fine, and most of the time any areas of improvement are either a training issue or a coaching issue, and we can kind of move ourselves along and just simply address that using some goals and using some support to our executive director. Occasionally there is serious criticism that comes from one or more people, and your written policy needs to include some guidelines for the board in how it will manage those kinds of situations if they were to ever happen. So let's start off with an assumption that you've got some critique, but it's come from only one person. So you've sent out 2 or 3 surveys, and they've gone to 15, 20 people, and you've got one person who's not very happy and is giving some pretty blunt commentary, some critical commentary about how things are happening. So it's of concern to the board. So the first thing that we want to do is, as a committee, is to meet in camera and just say, how are we going to go about validating whether or not this is legitimate? And what you want to ask yourself is this a one-off situation where only one person feels this way? It's unrealistic to expect in any size organization, whether you have 5 staff or 50 staff or 500 staff, it doesn't matter. There will be people who are unhappy. If it's a one-off situation, you have one person who's disgruntled, who's your negative Nelly, who maybe has performance issues of their own, and the executive director or another manager is pushing them to improve and up their bar, that can lead to a critical point in an executive director's performance appraisal. And we need to then weigh that and say, if that's one person as one-off, it's probably okay to us, just let that drop. However, if you have this little spidey sense, a little niggle at the back of your head that says, you know what, I think we should look a little deeper. I wonder if there's some people who are feeling the same, and we need to investigate this further. So this is a judgment call on the part of the committee, and by all means engage the entire board in this conversation, because if you're going to go further investigation, it probably should be a board motion that requires the committee or permits the committee to move this process along and then talk to some more people. Now, how do you talk to those people to either validate that this is a concern or put the concern to bed as not a big issue? So the process is usually one of surveying a few more people. So we send out the same survey but to a broader group of people, and from that we either validate that there are more concerns coming forward or potentially that the concerns are just from this one individual. So that's one way of doing it. If it's a really big concern, and by really big I would mean an allegation of some kind of wrongdoing, an abuse allegation, an allegation of theft or fraud or inappropriate management of agency resources, any of those things that come forward, is that we might want to meet face-to-face confidentially with people, and usually that's the chair of the board or the chair of the committee. Meeting sometimes by telephone is actually the safest way, because we can have a private phone call, and sometimes it is face-to-face because the nature of the conversation needs to be a personal conversation rather than via phone call. Do not do this by email. The chair of the board should never send an email out saying, we got some critical feedback and I'm just wondering if you have ever noticed that. Right? That looks like a witch hunt, and most people will simply shut down. They won't respond to the email, or they'll have a very guarded response. Now let's suppose that this is problem number 2, is that several people in the surveys explained or commented on similar or same kinds of concerns, and that is a more generalized picture. This is a little bit easier in some ways because an investigation or further review is absolutely required. And again, your option are to have face-to-face or telephone conversations, or secondly, broaden the net, throw the net wider in terms of expanding the survey. Now, the question that often arises then is, this will cause a delay in the process, and what do we tell our executive director? You have two options as always. You can be honest and just simply say some concerns arose and we're going to take some additional steps to determine whether those concerns are valid, whether they're shared broadly, or whether they're just one or two people who have some issues. That's a very risky thing, because if the executive director is doing something wrong or is struggling in her relationship with some of the people inside or outside your organization, she, her, or he may decide to retaliate. They may start guessing who provided that critical feedback. They might be right, and there may be some payback to some of those people who took a leap of faith that confidential and anonymous really meant something when you said it at the beginning of the survey. So this is problematic, to be too transparent and too honest. Very often it's better to say, not to lie, but to say something a little bit more, less specific, a little bit more general, and just say, the board is in the process, we're still gathering information, we're still weighing some information that needs to come in, and we're not stalled, we're just a little bit behind time. So that allows you to be quasi-honest, but not too detailed or specific in what you are doing to be able to draw this forward. Again, the seriousness of the concerns and the allegations will determine how transparent you are. If they're minor things, you're inclined to be a little bit more specific in what you say to your ED. If they are really difficult things that are likely to lead to disciplinary action or potentially to dismissal, you are going to say almost nothing, because you need to be able to gather that information and to be fairly careful and discreet in terms of how you go forward with that. So in any side of the organization, we're going to have a few people who are not happy. Chances are, because of the semi-randomized process of gathering information, particularly of non-direct reports inside the organization, you're going to have to weigh the seriousness, and you're going to strive for balanced feedback. And here's the challenge: you don't want to ignore or minimize the concerns that are coming forward, because they may be legitimate and they may be something that are really serious things where the writing is on the wall and the board needs to listen up. However, you also don't want to launch a witch hunt and seriously overreact. Remember that when people write comments and surveys, it's rarely about fact. It is in fact about perception. Any event that happens can be interpreted by the people who participated in that event. And all of us have had meetings or situations that have happened where when the storytelling happens afterwards, it's an entirely different experience from different people's perspectives. So some people will say, I went to that meeting and I thought it was fine. I don't know what people are worried about. I thought it was okay. Like, it was a good conversation. And other people will say there was so much conflict and it almost blew up and it got really ugly and it was really, and they were all in the same meeting. So remind yourself that when people make critical comments, it is filtered by their experiences and their reality, and is based in perception, not fact or truth. It might be their truth, but it might always 100% truthful. So be aware that we want to make sure that we strike that balance, and it can be a very difficult time. By the way, part of my consulting practice is coaching and guiding boards and executive directors through difficult kinds of processes. I have participated in an investigatory kind of capacity in supporting boards to actually gather that information. So it's being done by a third party external to the organization can sometimes be helpful. So if you need a little consultation and advice, fire me off an email to Paula MacLean at learningforleaders.ca, and I'm happy to just weigh in. There's no cost for that whatsoever. If I actually do something for your organization, by all means, I'll charge you a fee. But just for some advice and some kind of think outside the box or think with you and puzzle your way through how to proceed, I'm more than happy to provide support to your board or to a senior manager in that process. So, make my email light up, and I'm happy to have that chat with you. So we're at the end of the module, and here is your learning assignment. I want you to review your current executive director PA process and see whether it includes all the key elements that we talked about that are best practices. And then develop an action plan to either improve your policy, or if you don't have a PA policy, develop an action plan that will take it from ground zero to all the way to having a really good, solid policy in writing that you can trial and tweak after you've used it with your executive director. Remind yourself you have many organizations that are your sister organizations in your sector, in your communities, who likely have parts or all of this already refined. Don't build the wheel from scratch. Draw on other organizations' expertise, on their advice. Some of them will have worked with consultants, some of them will have HR specialists on their boards. So there's no point into building it from square one when you can get some help from your sister organizations. And in my experience, those organizations are more than happy to share what they have developed for their own nonprofit. So that's the end of the module on Executive Director Performance Appraisals. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it's been beneficial to you, and see you in the next module. Bye for now.